Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus, here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is Wednesday the 21st of February 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the political headlines today. So to start off with, one big story to do with Brexit. David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, set out the UK's official response to the EU's Brexit transition deal proposals, and will also set out its formal position as well. The UK actually set this out to the European Commission bosses yesterday, and indeed it will be laid out before the UK House of Commons via a written statement today as well. What's included? Now, already stuff has come out or reported to have come out in today's papers. First off, David Davis will demand a mechanism to protect UK from any harm caused by new rules and regulations introduced during the 20-month transition period. That's the time when the UK will be part of the club and will have to accept the rules and regulations of the EU, but will not be able to influence them in any way and will not be at the table to discuss these new rules and regulations which are going to be implemented. Davis has also chosen, and this is the key one, not to formally reject the EU's demands that all new migrants arriving in the EU after March 2019 will get full freedom of movement rights. Now, that's a key point. It's always been that after March 2019, EU citizens cannot maintain the rights they have before Brexit, before we leave the EU, even during the implementation period. This implies that the government has softened their stance on that. Now, however, a UK official is quoted as saying in Politico today, we are not conceding it, but we are also not putting a roadblock in the way at the outset. It will be the subject of tough negotiations. Now, this comes after 4 senior ministers yesterday received a list of hard Brexit demands sent by 62 backbench Tories, quite a number of them prominent members of the Conservative Party. It was leaked last night to the press quite widely, but the real highlights of it is that Britain cannot be a rule taker. In other words, it can't be part of any kind of EU regulatory body and have to be accepting rules from external bodies apart from ones which have originated in the UK in Parliament or in UK mechanisms, and no transition period can be agreed without substantive negotiations going on during that transition period. So it would need to be a transition deal which is fundamentally about then working and talking about the free trade agreement as opposed to working out the technicalities of Brexit. And also another technicality to that, during this transition period, the UK would have to be able to sign free trade agreements with other countries as well, something which has been a big dispute between the EU and the UK as well. Now, tomorrow is the big away day with the Prime Minister and her top team, Brexit team, at Chequers. That's where supposedly the UK is going to agree, or the Conservative Party and the government are going to agree their Brexit position and be able to put that forward to the country and the EU as well. But this is very significant in terms of the transition period, some softening on migration in the transition period, but also this very firm letter from a significant number of Conservative MPs demanding some very severe, hard Brexit positions from the government in terms of the transition period. So there's no doubt more to come out of that today and indeed in the days ahead. Next up, FCA Chief in tax row. Now, it's been revealed that the man who polices Britain's financial system has admitted previously using a scheme to have cut his own tax bill. Now, this is Charles Randall. He's now the chairman of the Financial Conduct Authority, and he's been reported he was made to pay back more than £114,000, well, £140,000 plus interest to HMRC as a result of being part of a scheme through a filming, production and promotion company called Ingenious Film Partners 2, where he was able to make savings efficiencies on his tax bill. Now, this is, on the headline, that's quite an interesting story. Certainly, it would be a shocking story, the FCA chief himself being involved in some kind of tax efficiency system, cutting his own tax bill. However, look at the context and the nuance in this story. He claims he only took part in the scheme because he was told by his financial advisor that it had been approved by HMRC officials, and so it was therefore effectively a legitimate scheme to be involved in. Secondly, this hasn't been flushed out from Charles Randall. He's actually made this very open and very transparent during the selection process for the Financial Conduct Authority. In fact, he disclosed it to the recruiting company that first approached him for the job. He then disclosed it at the first interview he had with the Treasury when they were discussing the position with him. And even then, the Treasury appointed him nonetheless in January, knowing the full details of this involvement in this scheme. Now, the political risk there is obviously big. The government particularly in the context of Jeremy Corbyn, for the many, not the few, and also what he's been saying about people who live in tax havens, who don't pay their fair share of tax, fair share of public services contributions. This is political dynamite in the sense of Treasury appoints man who's tried to cut his own tax bill to police Britain's financial system. However, there's some nuance in there, so have a read of the full story if you want to know the full facts. Finally, Jeremy Corbyn, change is coming. Now, this is to do with the Jeremy Corbyn Czech spy story. This has been running for a few days now, quite a few days in the papers, still making front pages. Just a quick summary, Jeremy Corbyn is accused of or alleged having meetings with a Czech spy in the 1980s, where there's a lack of clarity over the circumstance of that meeting and whether actually the Czech Republic or the Czech spy considered him to be a possible source of information against the UK, and he would be able to effectively be used as a spy himself, or someone who would be able to feed information back to to Czechoslovakia and be able to undermine the capitalist system as it was in the 1980s. But he's done a Facebook video last night in which he reinforced that he denied that he was ever a spy or ever had any kind of sort of James Bond-style dealings with any kind of spies in the 1980s as a backbench MP. But the key thing is how aggressive he was in his attack of the newspapers. He particularly went after what he said was the right-wing press, the Sun, the Mail, who've gone particularly hard on this story. He said newspapers are losing influence to social media. They're controlled by billionaire tax exiles, and the press, regardless of needing to be free, isn't actually very free because of who they're controlled by, because of who their masters are. He effectively wanted to paint himself, and I think this is very much what he wants to do, paint himself as an anti-establishment figure, almost a very Donald Trump strategy. It's me versus the media. It's a typical underdog story of the media trying to bash me down and me fighting against the establishment media, trying to make it more open and more spread, particularly with the presence of online press as well. The key line which has come through in a lot of the papers today, a lot of the news reports today, is the line he said at the end of the video where he said, "Change is coming," referring specifically to the papers. This has been interpreted as a nod toward the Leveson inquiry part 2, which has been promised by the government previously, but has not actually been enacted yet. This would obviously look further into the ethics of the media organisations and newspapers, specifically off the back of the Leveson inquiry a few years ago as well. But journalists have a job to do. There's still very fair questions that need to be answered regarding Jeremy Corbyn's meetings with Czechoslovakian diplomats, attachés, spies, whatever you want to call them. And journalists would not be doing their job if they weren't scrutinising the story as heavily as they are at the moment. So, regardless of Jeremy Corbyn's criticism of the right-wing press, the press across all political spectrums, left and right, have been covering and investigating this story and will do so as long as there is a public interest case to be had regarding it. That's pretty much it for today. You're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter right here. But from me and all the team here at Core London, have a fantastic start to your Wednesday.